Chosen one. There are moments in your life that even heaven pauses to watch. Moments that seem small to you, so ordinary, so hidden, but in the spiritual realm, they echo like thunder. You thought nobody noticed when you chose peace instead of revenge. You thought nobody saw you pray for the one who betrayed you. You thought your kindness in silence, your patience in pain, your mercy in heartbreak went unseen. But heaven saw it. And heaven was shocked, in the most holy, divine way possible. Because what you did wasn't normal. What you did wasn't easy. What you did reflected God Himself. When you responded with love instead of bitterness. When you stood firm in integrity when no one was watching. When you forgave and kept walking forward instead of getting stuck in pain. Heaven stood still and said, "This one looks like Jesus." Let's go back to that moment, the one you probably don't even think about anymore. You were hurt, blindsided, misunderstood, maybe even betrayed. You could have chosen darkness. You could have fought back in the flesh. But something in you said, "No, I'll choose light." That something wasn't weakness, it was divine strength. It was the Holy Spirit rising up inside you saying, "We don't fight the way the world fights." And in that moment, heaven leaned closer. Angels turned their attention to the scene. The Father smiled. Jesus nodded, because He recognized His reflection in you. You see, there are things that impress men: fame, power, applause. But there are things that move heaven: humility, mercy, obedience, and quiet strength. Heaven isn't impressed by how loud you pray. It's moved by how sincerely you love. And when you loved through pain, heaven was in awe. There's something many people don't realize about the chosen ones. You don't get tested in obvious ways. Your tests come wrapped in heartbreak, disappointment, delay, and misunderstanding. The test wasn't the betrayal. It was your response to it. Would you become bitter or better? Would you hold on to offense or hold on to faith? Would you clap back or stay quiet and let God handle it? And you passed. You didn't even know it at the time, but your response shifted things in the spirit realm. That choice not to retaliate broke generational patterns. That moment you prayed through tears dismantled an assignment of the enemy. That instant you said, "Lord, I trust you," became a courtroom victory in heaven. Heaven doesn't measure strength by what you fight, it measures it by what you surrender. And you surrendered when it hurt most. You surrendered your right to revenge. You surrendered your urge to prove them wrong. You surrendered your timeline, your reputation, your pain, into God's hands. And heaven said, "They've chosen righteousness over recognition." Chosen one. You thought you were walking through those storms alone. You thought your silent obedience went unnoticed. But let me tell you something powerful. Heaven was watching. And not just watching. Heaven was celebrating. Because obedience, especially when it costs you something, is the highest form of worship. Let's be real, obedience is easy when life makes sense. When doors open, when blessings flow, when everything feels aligned. But what about when it doesn't? What about when obedience meant losing friends? When doing the right thing meant standing alone? When holding your tongue burned more than speaking out? When forgiveness felt unfair, and silence felt suffocating? That's when your obedience became sacred. You see, God doesn't measure your faith by how loud you shout, but by how still you stay when He whispers, "Wait." He doesn't measure your love by how much you give when it's easy, but by how much you surrender when it hurts. And every time you obeyed, quietly, faithfully, painfully, heaven rejoiced. You were living worship. You were showing the world what trust looks like in human form. There were moments when the enemy expected you to fold. He thought you'd quit, curse God, or compromise your calling. He sent disappointment, betrayal, and delay, all to make you stop believing. But what did you do? You stayed. You believed. You trusted. You whispered, "Even now, Lord, I'll follow you." And heaven gasped, because that kind of faith is rare. That kind of obedience moves the heart of God Himself. It's the same kind of obedience Abraham showed when he lifted the knife over Isaac. It's the same obedience Jesus displayed in the Garden of Gethsemane when He said, Not my will, but yours be done. When you chose surrender over control, you joined the same divine lineage of obedience. And heaven celebrated because you mirrored the Son. Heaven doesn't just rejoice when a sinner repents. Heaven also celebrates when a believer obeys. Every time you chose to trust instead of panic. Every time you forgave when you could have fought. Every time you prayed instead of complained. You created a sound in the spiritual realm. It wasn't the sound of noise, it was the sound of faith. And angels moved to that rhythm. Your obedience became a melody that heaven danced to. The Father leaned forward on his throne and said, "Look at my child, look how they trust me." And the angels replied, "Lord, they're doing it again, they're choosing you over everything else." Every yes you gave God became a crown moment in heaven. You said yes when you didn't have all the answers. Yes when your heart was breaking. Yes when the future was foggy. Yes when you didn't feel strong enough to continue. And those yes, they shook eternity. Because obedience isn't about perfection, it's about posture. It's about saying, "Lord, even when I don't understand, I'll still trust you." Heaven celebrates that kind of faith because it's rare. It's pure. It's unfiltered. It's the kind of obedience that can't be bought, only built through fire. Your obedience is the reason some storms didn't destroy you. Because while the storm was raging, heaven was covering you. You obeyed in weakness, and heaven turned that weakness into worship. You obeyed in tears, and heaven turned those tears into testimony. You obeyed in silence, and heaven turned your silence into a symphony. You might not have seen it, but your obedience caused ripple effects across realms. When you chose not to retaliate, you broke a curse. When you chose to forgive, you freed generations. When you stayed kind in cruelty, you reversed a pattern of darkness. Obedience isn't passive, it's powerful. It invites heaven's authority to step into your situation. It gives angels permission to fight on your behalf. It tells God, "You can trust me with more." Because obedience proves ownership, you belong to Him. Heaven doesn't celebrate obedience because of rules. It celebrates it because obedience means alignment. It means your heart beats in rhythm with God's will. It means you're in sync with heaven's design. And when heaven sees alignment, it releases acceleration. That's why things are about to shift for you, chosen one. Because obedience always precedes outpouring. Do you know why heaven was shocked by your obedience? Because you did it when it made no sense. You obeyed without a reward in sight. You trusted when others mocked your faith. You stayed pure in a culture that celebrates compromise. You prayed for people who hurt you. You loved when you could have left. That's not human strength, that's divine character. Heaven didn't celebrate because you performed perfectly. It celebrated because you reflected Him perfectly. Your obedience revealed what angels already know: that the Spirit of God truly lives inside you. They saw it and whispered, "This one carries the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead." That's why your obedience carries such power. Because it doesn't just please heaven, it represents heaven. Chosen one, listen closely. Obedience always unlocks elevation. It may not look immediate, but heaven's calendar doesn't forget. When Abraham obeyed, he was given nations. When Joseph obeyed, he was given a throne. When Ruth obeyed, she was given redemption. When Jesus obeyed, salvation was released to all of creation. And your obedience will release restoration. That's why the warfare got heavier right after you obeyed. That's why people suddenly turned on you. That's why things looked like they got worse before they got better. Because the moment you obeyed, the enemy lost jurisdiction. And heaven gained authority over your situation. Your yes closed demonic doors and opened divine ones. Heaven's applause isn't empty, it's activation. When heaven celebrates your obedience, it also accelerates your destiny. The Father has spoken over you. This one didn't just follow commands, this one followed my heart. And because of that, the verdict has changed in your favor. The atmosphere around you is shifting. New doors are opening. Old weights are lifting. The same obedience that made you cry is now birthing breakthrough. Because heaven always honors what cost you something. The tears you cried in private have become seeds in heaven's soil. And God is about to water them with reward. When you were obedient in pain, heaven prepared promotion. When you were obedient in silence, heaven prepared sound. The sound of restoration, the sound of recognition, the sound of reward. You didn't lose by obeying, you were being positioned. Can I tell you a secret? You weren't the only one in that room when you made that hard choice. There were angels standing there, unseen, silent witnesses. They saw you delete the message instead of replying in anger. They saw you pray for your enemies through tears. They saw you bless the ones who cursed you. They saw you lay your plans down at the altar again and again. And when you did, the angels rejoiced. Because every act of obedience pushes darkness back. Every act of obedience lights up the world a little brighter. Every act of obedience brings heaven closer to earth. Your life became a sermon the angels could worship to. You didn't just obey, you shifted the frequency of heaven on earth. Heaven celebrated your obedience then. And it's still celebrating now. Because obedience isn't just a moment, it's a movement. It's the rhythm of your spirit that keeps aligning with God's plan. Every time you choose Him again, heaven throws another celebration. And the Father looks at you with the same delight He had in Eden. And says, "This is very good." You may not have a crowd cheering for you on earth. But you've got a cloud of witnesses cheering from above. They're saying, "Keep going. Keep trusting. Keep obeying." You have no idea what's being written about your faith right now. Chosen one, don't ever underestimate what your obedience means to God. You may not have titles, followers, or recognition. But you have something heaven values far more, a yielded heart. That's why you carry peace that others can't understand. That's why you glow with grace even after what you've endured. Because obedience didn't just please God, it transformed you. It made you trustworthy. It made you powerful. It made you like Him. And heaven is still rejoicing over that. So if you're wondering whether it was worth it, yes, it was. Because obedience doesn't just move God's hand. It moves His heart. And when heaven celebrates your obedience, earth will soon witness the evidence. We saw what you did. We heard your quiet yes. We celebrated your faithfulness. And now we're preparing your reward. Chosen one, what you went through was designed to break you. But instead you bloomed. They expected you to crumble, but you grew in wisdom. They expected you to lose faith, but you grew in discernment. They expected you to become bitter, but you became better. And heaven took note. Because pain is supposed to deform most people, but for you, it transformed you. You came out with more compassion. You came out with deeper peace. You came out with a quiet confidence that says, "I know who fights for me." That's why heaven was shocked. Not because God didn't expect it, but because you fulfilled prophecy. You became the living sermon. You lived out forgiveness. You embodied grace. You reflected Christ in a situation where most would have reflected anger. You showed heaven and hell that the image of God still reigns on earth. You didn't even know it, but every time you chose love over hate, you broke an ancient cycle in your bloodline. You stopped the generational chain of anger, pride, and retaliation. You stopped the curse of reacting instead of praying. You became the first in your lineage to respond like heaven, not hell. That's why your warfare was so intense, because your obedience wasn't just about you. It was about your children, your family, your legacy. You did something eternal. You rewrote a story. You turned pain into prophecy. When you said, "Not my will, but yours, Lord," the same phrase that changed all of eternity. Heaven recognized that echo. You didn't realize it, but you were aligning yourself with Jesus Himself. And heaven was moved. For so long you've been asking, "God, did you see what they did to me?" And heaven responds today, "Yes, but we also saw what you did." You didn't retaliate, you interceded. You didn't gossip, you prayed. You didn't curse, you blessed. And that moved the court of heaven more than you can imagine. Because God isn't just a judge of wrongdoing, He's a rewarder of right doing. And now the gavel has dropped in your favor. Heaven's verdict is sealed. Case closed, reward released. Your faithfulness has been recorded. Your tears have been bottled. Your endurance has been written into heaven's archives. The same heaven that was silent for a while is now preparing to speak on your behalf. The same angels who watched you cry are now being sent to deliver your restoration. Do you know how rare your kind of obedience is? To choose God's will when your heart was breaking? To stay humble when you could have proven everyone wrong? To remain kind when cruelty surrounded you? That's not natural, that's divine nature. And heaven loves when someone on earth chooses to reflect its culture. You didn't just represent yourself, you represented heaven. Your response told the world what God's love really looks like. You may have felt invisible, but angels whispered your name. You may have felt weak, but heaven applauded your strength. Because you didn't just survive, you sanctified your story. Now that heaven has seen what you did, now that your record of righteousness has been sealed, the spiritual atmosphere around you is shifting. Doors are opening that were once locked. Enemies are being silenced without your effort. Favor is locating you in unexpected places. Because heaven always responds to obedience with overflow. The season of silent suffering is turning into a season of public favor. Where you were once overlooked, you'll now be honored. Where you were mocked, you'll now be magnified. Where you were doubted, you'll now be distinguished. Because you passed the test heaven didn't think many would endure. And heaven will now reward what you did in secret, publicly. Chosen one, you lost things, yes. People walked away. Opportunities slipped. Dreams delayed. But every single loss created room for a divine replacement. And when heaven replaces, it never matches what was lost, it multiplies it. What's coming will make sense of every tear. What's unfolding will confirm every unanswered prayer. What's manifesting will silence every doubter. Because God doesn't forget those who shock heaven with faith. You were tested by pain, but promoted by patience. And now your name is on heaven's list of those being restored, rewarded, and released. Chosen one, do you know what heaven does with stories like yours? It tells them, your faith is now a testimony angels reference when they see another believer in pain. Your endurance is being written into the eternal record as proof that love conquers all. When you kept your hands clean and your heart pure, you gave heaven another victory over darkness. You showed that humanity can still reflect holiness. You proved that the image of God is alive and active. So heaven doesn't just celebrate you, heaven learns from you. You shocked heaven with what you did. Now heaven is about to shock you with what it does next. There is a divine reversal in motion, a supernatural restoration unfolding, an unexpected elevation forming. You're about to see what all the silence, testing, and endurance were for. Heaven is preparing to announce your name in places you've never been. God is orchestrating connections that match your new capacity. Doors that refused to open before will now swing wide, because your heart is ready. Heaven is not just watching anymore, it's working. So the next time you doubt your impact, remember, heaven saw everything. The nights you cried and still prayed. The days you were kind and still hurt. The seasons you kept faith when it made no sense. Heaven didn't just watch, you inspired it. You reminded angels what faith looks like. You reminded demons that love never fails. You reminded creation that God still lives inside His people. You are proof that holiness still exists on earth. You are evidence that grace still works. You are the reason heaven smiles today. And the message from heaven to you is simple. We saw it all. We're proud of you. And now, it's your turn to see what we've been preparing. If this word spoke to your spirit, comment below. Heaven saw me. Because yes, it did. And if you're ready for heaven to move on your behalf, like this video, share it with another chosen one who needs to know their quiet obedience changed heaven's atmosphere. You've been faithful long enough. You've loved deeply, endured quietly, and passed tests no one even knew existed. Now get ready. Because the same heaven you shocked is about to shock the world through you. You are seen. You are celebrated. You are chosen.